Do we? Okay, great. So I'm Janine Harrison. I have been at Flinders for 17 years. I'm one of the senior lecturers in social work. So how many of you are brand new to social work? Almost everyone. Okay. So I'd also like to introduce my lovely colleagues. Would you like to introduce yourself, Kim?
Yeah, sure. So hi everyone, my name is Kim Lawrence and I'm part of the Work Integrated Learning Support team, so helping students get themselves ready for placement basically, and I've been with the university now for just over a year.
And Will?
Hi. I'm Will, and like Kim, I'm part of the Work Integrated Learning Support team, and I've been here a little longer than a year.
Thanks, Will. And thank goodness for these two over here, because I'm so technologically challenged, and they're going to be doing all the more complicated IT stuff. So welcome, especially for those of you who are brand new and maybe this is your first day on campus. I hope you have a really amazing experience studying social work at Flinders. Generally, the feedback that we get from students about the experience at Flinders is very positive. So I really do hope that that's the experience you have as well. So the focus of today's session is on preparing for placement, but I'd like to start by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of the Kaurna people. This beautiful campus is traditional lands of the Kaurna people, which is one of the hundreds of Aboriginal communities in Australia, and we pay respect to their elders, past, present and emerging. And as social workers, we have a particular commitment to thinking about and challenging structural disadvantage and oppression that continue to impact on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Feel free to stop me if you have a question along the way. We also have a bunch of people who are watching online, and Will and Kim will be bringing up questions that are being asked online. And this session is being recorded, just so that you know. So when you ask a question, we do have to run up to you with a microphone so that the students can hear your question. And it'll be a benefit to those who are listening to the recording afterwards. Right. So this is really about what you need to know about social work placements. So if this is your first semester in the Masters, you will be doing your first placement in second semester this year. That's the typical study plan, unless you're studying part-time. If this is, if you're new to the Bachelors of Social Work, you do your first placement in your third year of the Bachelor's program. So you've got a little bit longer before you have to do a placement. So as we said, Kim and Will over here are from the Work Integrated Learning Support team, working with social work placements in particular for our college, which is the College of Education, Psychology and Social Work. I'm currently the academic field education coordinator, and I also do other teaching. So some of you who are new in the Masters will be having your first lecture with me next week in a different topic, social work with diverse populations. So I look forward to meeting you there as well if you're doing my topic. So we do encourage you to make note of any questions you might have regarding placements. There's no such thing as a stupid question. Please feel free to ask us. And those of you who are listening online, Will is going to be making a note and we'll get your questions along the way. So we're going to try and address some of the sort of general questions that you might have first, give you an overview of field placement, and then we'll answer specific questions that you might have. Right, so what is field education? It's a core component of Australian social work courses. It's also an international requirement in social work programs. So every university across the world that has a recognised social work program has to have a minimum of 1,000 hours of placement across usually 2 placements, but it's a minimum of 1,000 hours. And that's a global requirement that we can't do anything about if we want to have international recognition. So it's a long time. You spend a lot of your time doing field placement in social work courses. So it's learning in the workplace in a real human services context where you're working with policies, individual service participants, groups of people, communities. There's a range of things that you might do on placement as a social work student. Keep coming, it's okay, don't worry. So you're transferring knowledge that you're learning from the classroom into your field placement and actually getting a sense of what it's like to be a social worker in practice while you have supervision by a qualified professional social worker. You do your learning under the supervision of a social worker, either within the agency where you're placed or appointed by the university. And if you've got someone appointed by the university, you also have an on-site supervisor who may be from a different human services profession like youth work, community development, psychology, and so on. It also gives you an opportunity to develop your professional identity as a beginning social worker. So understanding what it means to be a social worker and how social work differs from other human service professions, like when you're working alongside psychologists or allied health professionals. So understanding what it is that you as a social worker are doing that's a little bit different to other human service professions. You have varied practice methods in field placement. It can be anything from indirect practice with policies and research to direct practice with communities, groups, individuals, families, couples, and so on. The requirements for placement are set by the Australian Association of Social Workers in what's called the ASWEAS, Australian Social Work Education and Accreditation Standards, and they were updated in November 2021. They get updated every few years, and in order for us to be accredited with the AASW, we have to comply with the ASWEAS, with all of their requirements. Any questions so far? Anything, Will, in the message? Okay. Feel free. There's no such thing as a stupid question. I know there were lots of you here, but I promise you we're nice. We won't. We're very happy for you to ask questions. So what do you need to know about field education? So you do 2 field placements at Flinders. Each of them is 500 hours, which is about 70 days or 18 weeks if you're doing them at about 7.5 hours per day, which is the typical daily attendance on placement. There are some variations to this, but that's the sort of typical standard attendance. So for the master's students, like I said, your first placement is in your 2nd semester of study. And if you're in the bachelor's program, your first placement is in your 3rd year of study. So you do a bunch of prerequisite topics for the first 2 years before you go on placement. The placements are coordinated by the Work Integrated Learning Support Team, Kim and Will. Which is very confusing. There's a Will in the Will team. We do have other people in the college who work with placements, but Will and Kim are the primary people. So there's an email address, swplacements@flinders.edu.au, and Kim and Will are the people at the other end of that email address who answer your queries related to field placements. So placements have to meet the ASW requirements in order for you to be matched to a suitable placement in Adelaide or interstate or in a remote region, because we do have those as well. We have to make sure that the placement meets the ASW requirements, the ASWEAS that I mentioned earlier. Just on a practical level, for those of you who are not from Adelaide. We do have a large cohort of international students, which is fabulous for us because we love having diversity in our programs, and that's an enriching experience for us as well. I just want to reassure you, if you are an international student, while it's an advantage to have a driver's license to get around placement, it's not a requirement. You can still be matched to a placement if you don't have a driver's license or access to a car, but it just means that the options are a little bit more limited. Because there are some agencies that require that you drive an agency car, and you can only do that if you've got an Australian driver's license. And some people don't want to drive an agency car, even if they do have an Australian license, because it's a bit daunting, especially if you're quite new to driving. So don't worry about the driving issue. There's always an option. That's not in itself a limiting factor. It does put some restrictions on where you can go on placement, but it's still possible for you to be placed. Any questions about any of that so far? Okay. I see some kind of rabbit in the headlights looks out there. I hope you're not feeling scared about all of this yet. I do have to emphasize again that the vast majority of people really do have rewarding and valuable experience on field placement. There are occasional challenges, but the majority go pretty well, I have to say, in my experience. Yes. Well, do you mind to put it in the microphone? Thanks.
So how does a typical week look like during placements? How many days are you here on campus, and how many hours are you spending in the placement?
Yeah, great question. So typically in both the Masters and the Bachelors, you do placement 4 days a week. So in the Masters, you do Monday to Thursday, and then you go to classes on a Friday on campus or online. And then the Bachelor students do it the other way around. You have your classes on a Monday, and then you attend placement from Tuesday to Friday. But there are some variations to that as well, which I'll go through in a moment. Anything else at this stage? Okay. Right. So compulsory pre-placement requirements, and this is really Will and Kim's territory. They're much more involved in this than we are. So do you want to talk about this, Kim?
Sure, okay. So there are a couple of compulsory compliance items for students going out on placement. So regardless of where you're going on placement, one of those things is the police check. So that is a requirement for all students. Also, COVID-19 vaccination, that is a requirement across many of our agencies, most of them, I wouldn't say all, but most of them. In addition to that, if you're doing your placement in South Australia, there is a requirement that you obtain a working with children check, as well as an aged care sector clearance check. Both of those are issued through the Department of Human Services. Compulsory item as well is the Safe Environments Training Certificate. So those are basically compulsory for South Australian-based placements. If you're going to be doing your placement interstate, there's a couple of additional items that you need to obtain, such as a state-based working with children check, because they differ from state to state. And again, the state-based mandatory reporting, which would be your safe environment training equivalent for that particular state. There are some placements that we match students to that require additional compliance on top of those. So you'll be notified in due course when you're matched with an agency if you need any of those, such as if you're placed within an education setting, you need to then get a RAN, which is the responding to risks of harm, abuse and neglect. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kim. So just to add to what Kim is saying, if you do have a criminal history, I just want to let you know that this does happen occasionally. So we can have a confidential discussion with anybody who does have criminal history about what that might mean for your placement. If that applies to you, I would encourage you to contact me as academic coordinator in field education, and then we can organise to meet to have a confidential discussion. In many cases, even with a criminal history, it's possible for you to be placed, but it depends on what it is. So it's fairly common for people to have a criminal history from when they were young, you know, many years ago, often drug-related offences. And those are generally fairly easy to get around. But if you have a more recent offence on your record, it can be an issue. With you going on placement. And sometimes what happens, depending on what it is, you can still be placed, but within a restricted context. There are some criminal history issues that will make it impossible for you to be placed. And that's essentially if you've got something of some sort of violent crime on your record that's recent, because you're not going to be able to get the required working with children and aged care checks if you have something like that on your record. So if you're unsure about that, or if anyone who's listening is unsure, you're welcome to contact me if you would like further information about that. So
I'll just add on that, Janine, is on our social work compliance webpage. These are all listed there. There's a checklist provided there for you on the webpage and also on the flow page, which I think we'll mention later. So all of this the information is there for you. It's a lot of information to take in. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll bombard you with information, and it's very overwhelming. So you're gonna, need to come back to some of this, and you will get reminders along the way. And Kim and Will be sending you a series of emails over the course of the semester for those of you who are going on placement in second semester this year. So they'll give you prompts in those emails about things that you need to be doing to prepare for placement. So don't worry, you don't have to understand and remember all of this right now. It'll be a process. Anything else, Will or Kim, you want to add around the pre-placement requirements?
Maybe just, I think the next slide details the process.
Right.
The process begins, we're starting the process for semester 2 probably around the beginning of April. So you'll receive a notification on the flow site, and also you'll receive an email, and you'll then have the opportunity to nominate yourself for placement. And that initiates the process and the communication between yourselves and the Will support team, then with the instructions and due dates along the way, with placement commencing around the 17th of July. Yeah.
So I strongly recommend that for those of you who are new, you start regularly checking your Flinders emails. Make sure that you signed up for your Flinders emails. And also, if you tend to use your personal email address, maybe get your Flinders emails forwarded to that address, just to make sure that you're not going to miss anything important. We've put there the contact details for Kim and Will, the Work Integrated Learning Support Team. There's the telephone number, the email address, and also, as Kim was saying, there's a flow site, which is college-wide, but there's a specific section for social work placements that will give you more information along the way in preparation for your placements. So for those of you who haven't yet seen a flow site, if you're brand new, you might not have seen one yet, you will become familiar with flow sites across the course of this semester, because all of the topics also have a flow site. So yeah, don't worry if it doesn't make sense yet. So it's really important that when you get emails from the Work Integrated Learning team, that you follow the instructions in those emails to make sure that you are going to get placed in the semester that you need to be placed. Because all this pre-placement stuff that you need to do before you can go on placement, and the Will team doesn't know about you unless you respond to their instructions. And the first thing you need to do is complete a survey, which tells them that you actually intend to go on placement the following semester. And we will bombard you with reminders about the survey. So it's not just once, you'll get emails many times. And the Master of Social Work and the Bachelor of Social Work course coordinators will also remind you about those key steps and deadlines that you need to meet. Okay, all make sense so far? Yep. Okay. So very important dates. The first one is when you're likely to get your first email from Will and Kim, which is the 3rd of April. And they will there give you instructions to complete a very brief survey that basically says, yes, I want to do a placement in semester 2, and also deals with specific things like if you're interstate or in a remote location, or possibly going to be doing a work-based placement, which I'll explain in more detail in a moment. The next really important date is the deadline for putting information about yourself on InPlace. You won't know what InPlace is yet. Don't worry, you'll be getting instructions about that, and guidelines, lots and lots of guidelines. But InPlace is basically where you put detailed information about yourself that helps the Will team to match you to a suitable placement if you're in the Adelaide region. And if you're interstate or in a remote area, the process is slightly different, but Kim and Will tell you more about that closer to the time.
And Janine, I'll just add there, InPlace is also the portal where you'll be uploading all your compliance documents, where we will be verifying those for you.
And the deadline for those compliance documents is the 30th of June. So that's your criminal history checks, your child safe environments, vaccinations. What have I missed?
The only thing that might be a little after that is if you're doing a placement that requires some additional compliance. So then there might be a little bit of time after that date to submit any of those additional compliance items.
Yeah. So really, really important that you're uploading your compliance documents before that date, so that you can actually go on placement, because you can't go on placement until you've met the requirements regarding compliance. Okay, time frames and placement attendance. So the reason we do this now is so that you can organise your life around the placement topic, and you understand what sort of time and commitments involved and what to expect. So for semester 2, those of you going to be doing a placement in semester 2, placements, the earliest you can start is the 3rd of July, and it's anywhere from the 17th to the 31st of July typically. That's the main period where placements start. Depends on the agency that you're going to. Different agencies have different orientation programs, and the start of the orientation program does vary slightly from one agency to another. So you need to be available before and after the semester period, because a 500-hour placement takes longer than the semester period if you're doing 4 days a week. So it is usually 4 days a week, which takes 18 weeks, which is 4 to 5 months. So for those of you doing 4 days per week, you'll be finishing in about late November to early December if you don't have sick leave, and if you start on time. So it's really important that you know that this goes past the semester period. So don't be booking flights for the 1st of December because you won't be finished placement by then. Minimum attendance on placement is 2 days per week, but that's only with approval, and that's usually only for students who have an access plan related to a disability or medical condition that allows them to attend placement less often because of the nature of their condition. It's important for you to know if you do attend placement less than 4 days per week, it obviously takes longer. So if you're doing 2 days per week, it actually takes 9 months. So it's as long as being pregnant. And if you're doing it 3 days per week, which you can do with approval, it takes about 6 months. So from sort of 22 to 24 weeks. So if you're doing less than 4 days per week, it's likely that you're going to be going into the following year. So December, January, maybe even February. So we are still submitting grades for students who are finishing their placements from last semester. So who are finishing now in February, and there's still about maybe 6 students on placement who are only going to be finishing in March because of their not attending 4 days per week. So just so that you know, it can be a very, very long time. I hope that all makes sense.
Also worth noting is the interview period.
Yeah.
So when we begin matching, is to make sure that you're available probably from about middle of May to take on those interviews that you'll need to do before your placement match can be confirmed.
So we will tell you more about that closer to the time, but almost all the agencies that we have will do an interview before they accept you on placement. And so you obviously need to go for the interview before your placement can be confirmed, and we'll give you tips and guidelines regarding the interviews, but essentially you need to prepare for it as if it's a job interview, because an agency won't take you on placement unless they feel like there's going to be some benefits for them as well, and they feel that you can fit in with the team and that kind of thing. So like I say, we will tell you more about that closer to the time. So essential skills and qualities for success on placement. The reason we want to talk with you about this at this stage, when you're brand new to the master's or the bachelor's program, is to make sure that you know what you're letting yourselves in for. Because sometimes we do hear when new students come in that they've been told by someone that social work is easy. It's really not. And the bit that's really not easy is the placement, because that's where you're in a real human services organization having to deal with challenges that social workers deal with as part of their practice. And if you're not sure that social work is the right option for you, then it's important to be able to reflect on that now and make sure that you really do know what it is that you've signed up for. So it's really important in order for you not only to be successful through the course of your studies, but particularly on placement, to have the ability to engage well with people, to have empathy, warmth, genuineness, those sorts of qualities, to have excellent communication skills, so some level of confidence regarding your communication skills, because you're going to be communicating with a diverse range of people on placement. So there's got to be a certain level of confidence in your ability to communicate with people. Openness to learning is really important, and it can be really tricky if you're a mature age student. I remember, for example, when I did my master's degree and I was much older by then, it is a bit hard to go back into being in that student role when you're in, a leadership position in an agency. But it's really, really important whenever you're studying social work that you are willing to reflect on your learning, that you're open to learning, open to getting feedback from your supervisors, and really wanting to learn, have a curiosity about learning, and not assuming that you already know. Because I've been a social worker for, I think, about 35 years now, and I still feel like I learn new things every day. It's an ongoing, lifelong learning process. Confidence is really important in dealing with complex, challenging, unpredictable situations, and that includes the ability to deal with conflict, aggression, confrontation. So there will be times on placement where you have to deal with someone who's agitated or aggressive or shouty or swearing at you, those kinds of things. And it's really important that you feel confident. And we will, in your different courses, we will talk about skills to help you to deal with situations like that. But it's really important that you feel confident in being able to approach situations like that, because it's just a reality of social work practice. Ability to accept people and avoid judgment. We will all nag you about this in all of your topics that you do in social work. When we're working with people in this profession, it's really important that we approach them with a genuine respect for who they are, and an understanding of people's diversity without being judgmental. And all of us, have to undo some areas of being judgmental. That's a normal human thing, but it's really important for us to be able to be open to that, and acknowledge areas of prejudice we might have that we need to work on in order to work effectively with people, whether it's about race, gender, sexuality, class, socioeconomic background, disability, all of those issues that we might have judgments about that we're sometimes not even aware of. Resilience is really important, because we do deal with some really difficult stuff for social workers, and it's important to have a resilience and an ability to deal with the nature of the work that we do. That doesn't mean that you can't be affected by the work. So I can talk for myself, for example. I'm a complete softie. I'm an absolute marshmallow. In practice, when I work with people, I cry a lot, not with them, after I get home, usually, when I'm talking with my husband or my daughters. And it's okay to have that emotional human response to things. But it's also important that we have ways of looking after ourselves, and doing self-care, so that the work that we're doing doesn't completely overwhelm us and we burn out in the process of doing that sort of work. Time management and reliability, also really, really important. This is probably one of the big areas where students fall down in placement, where we see placements being terminated by an agency, or where someone fails a placement. Often it's around professionalism, so a lack of reliability, accountability, time management, that sort of thing. So it's really, really important that you can pitch up when you're supposed to, leave when you're supposed to, consistently for the period of 500 hours that you're on placement. Otherwise, you'll get into trouble with the agency. And we don't want that. We don't want you to get into trouble. We would love to see all of you succeed in your field education experience. Any comments or questions about any of that? Okay. I like to see the smiles as well, because that tells me that some of you are going, oh, I can do this. Hopefully that's what you're thinking. So now we get to some common questions that people ask. So one of the first ones is, can I organise my own placement? If you're interstate, so in New South Wales, Northern Territory, Western Australia, and so on, it may be relevant for you to organise your own placement, or if you remote South Australia, or in a remote town somewhere in Australia. But if you're in the Adelaide area, Will and Kim are the ones who organise your placement. Do you want to add anything to that?
That's basically it. Please don't find your own placement within the Adelaide region. Yeah.
And one of the reasons for that is, there's another social work program in Adelaide that's with UniSA, and over the years, the human service organisations that offer placements have asked us not to let students contact them directly, because they get swamped with students asking, and so they wanted to be managed by the university, not by people approaching agencies themselves. What days do you go on placement? I think I've already mentioned that. Monday to Thursday for Master of Social Work, Tuesday to Friday for Bachelor of Social Work. Can you go on placement overseas? We haven't had overseas placements during COVID, but we might be revisiting that this year. We're not sure yet because it depends on a whole range of things that have to be put in place, including insurance. So if you are wanting to do a placement overseas, keep that thought, and we'll see whether it's possible from second semester for students to do overseas placements. Can you have previous work in human services counted? So some students are eligible for what's called recognition of prior learning, RPL, for the first placement. So if you've done within the last 7 years, at least 3 years full-time equivalent work in human services that's similar to what a social worker does, you might be eligible for recognition of prior learning. You can contact the college office and they'll send you further information about that to check whether you might be eligible. And if you are eligible, then you can apply. There are 2 stages. The first stage is just to check your eligibility. And then if you are eligible, then you go to the second stage, which is where you have to submit much more detail regarding your work history. And you have to have a reference from a social worker and a whole range of other things. Where was I? Can you do your placement in your current workplace? Those of you already work in human services in an agency that could employ social workers, doesn't necessarily have to employ social workers at the moment. You might be able to do your placement in your place of work under certain conditions. So the ASWERS requirement for that is that you have to be able to do something that's different to the work that you were employed to do, and also not under your current manager. You have to be supervised by someone who's not your current manager. If you do have questions about that, you can contact Kim and Will, and they can send you further information about work-based placements.
I'll just add to that is that you'll probably be asked that in the survey that goes out at the beginning of April, and sometimes it can be confused, the work-based placement with a standard placement that we source for you, just because some people think work-based placement, yes, I'm going to be doing it in a workplace. So just remembering that the 2 are different. Yeah. So the one you're getting paid for and the other one you're not.
Yeah. Thanks, Kim. Any other questions at this stage? Yes, sorry, Will, would you mind running up the stairs in the microphone?
Hi.
Hi.
I study master social work. I have 2 questions actually. The first one about repetition of learning. If someone's eligible to do that, it means that they do not have to do the placement, or they can do the placement, but only in the short days. Maybe you want to answer that first.
Okay, sure. I'll answer that one first. So recognition of prior learning is for the whole of the first placement. There are some students who apply for and get recognition of prior learning and then decide to do a placement anyway, just because they want to. It's unusual because it's a long process to apply, and you have to write like a long essay pretty much about your experience, but it is possible. But RPL is for the whole topic, not just a portion of placement, and it's only for the first placement, so you can't apply for RPL for your final placement, only your first placement. And then your other question.
Yes, and my second question, we will have 2 500 hours.
Yes.
Right? What, based on your experiences, what the recommendations for us as students? I mean, like, should we, for example, if I would try something healthcare, first placement in the healthcare and the second placement in the same area, or just try what's interest to us? Thanks.
So there are 2 parts there. So the first one is in terms of the ASWERS, you can't do both placements in the same field of practice. They have to be in different fields of practice. But the other thing is in terms of how the placement matching works, and maybe Will or Kim want to add to this, you don't get to say, I want go in aged care and then you get an aged care placement, you'll be asked to identify a range of fields of practice that interest you, and you'll hopefully be matched to one of those. There's no guarantee, but it's really important for yourself, for your own benefit, to be open to learning experiences, because we do sometimes, not often, but we do sometimes have students say, I can't work in aged care, I can't deal with trauma, I can't work with children, I don't like old people. It's like such a long list of where they don't want to go that it's impossible for poor Will and Kim to find a suitable placement. So openness to learning is really important. But the other thing is sometimes you have no idea what it's going to be like to be in a particular field of practice until you do it. So, for example, when I first qualified as a social worker, one of the jobs that I went into just on a contract, because I was about to go overseas, was in the drug and alcohol field, which I really didn't think I'd enjoy, but I loved it so much that I actually changed my plans for going overseas and ended up working there for like 7 years. Because it was completely different to what I expected, and I absolutely loved working in that field. So sometimes you just don't know what it's going to be like to work in a particular field of practice. So being open to learning and flexible in your approach is really good for you to reduce the amount of stress that you might otherwise experience. Anything else? Over here, Will. I'm glad you're running around with the microphone.
Thank you. From my understanding, the schedule for next semester will be like 4 days for placement and 1 day for school.
Yes.
Do you recommend, or is that still possible to have other work commitments?
To have other work commitments, it's possible, and most people do, but most people reduce their work commitments. So they might be doing some work on the weekend, or sometimes they negotiate to do placement for 3 days a week and then do studies in their other topics online, and then do a couple of days of work. Yeah, it's tricky because it is a really big commitment. And one of the things we really notice with field education is that people are very stressed when they're on placement because you're juggling so much. You're doing work, other topics, field placement, trying to have a family life, trying to sleep occasionally. It's really, really, really a big challenge to juggle all of that. Okay. One behind you, Will. Oh, you don't? No, you don't have to wear uniforms on placement. There are actually a couple of agencies where you might. Not many though. It's very unusual. Usually you dress in your own. There is a dress code though. So we will tell you more about that closer to the time, give you some guidelines about what kinds of things you can or can't wear or shouldn't wear on placement. Yeah. Any other, sorry, Will? Oh, Kim.
So I just want to ask, is the placement changeable? And another question is, do you get multiple match or just one?
Just one, yeah. You can imagine when there are about 350 students going on placement at a time, if people get offered more than one match, the chaos of agencies having to deal with multiple interviews. And we think it's unfair to students if we send, say an agency has offered one placement and we send 5 students so that they can pick their favourite, it means the other 4 are not going to get offered that placement. So you get one match.
Yeah, so the interviews are not competitive, so we only match one student to one placement.
Yeah.
On those matching notifications that go out, there is an option at the bottom of the email to put in a request for a variation to the placement, and that gets assessed by Janine and ourselves. But that's in very rare circumstances that those are ever approved.
Yeah.
And if you want to say more about that.
Yeah, sure. So in other words, you can appeal the placement match that you've been given, and some of the reasons that might be relevant to you are if you're already a client of that agency, that's obviously conflict of interest, or if it's a field of practice that for a personal reason wouldn't be appropriate for you to go to. So for example, someone who's had a recent sexual assault, we wouldn't want to put them in an organization where they're dealing with something like that because it's too close to home, or if there's been perhaps a mistake, so you've moved and the will
Which we
team is
hope
based.
is not the case, because we do ask for your address nice and early in the process.
Yes, yeah, but we still have every semester people who forget to tell Kim and Will that they've moved, and so you get matched to where they think you live, but meanwhile you living not there anymore, and then that would have to be looked at. But yes, please do change your address. It's really, really important that Will and Kim have your correct address on the system, because that's what they're looking at when they place you. Anything else?
So I think the masters, I'd like to know if it's possible to move a placement to the second year, all the placement.
To move your placement?
All the placement program, second year, instead of like first year with all my studies, and then
right.
second year.
Yeah. It's tricky in the masters because you've only got 4 semesters, and one of the ASW requirements is that you do your placements over 2 years. So the typical study plan in the masters is you do your first placement in your 2nd semester, and then you do your final placement in your 4th semester. So if you postpone both of them until the 2nd year, it means doing them in the same year, in semester 3 and 4, if you know what I mean. So it's preferable that you do your first placement in your 2nd semester in the masters, yeah. Unless you're studying part-time. If you're studying part-time, it doesn't matter. You can change your study plan. And also, if you're an international student, you are quite restricted because of your COE, which if you're an international student, you know what I mean. And it's difficult to change the COE because of your visa requirements, and you have to study full-time as an international student. Okay, anything else? Yes. Sorry, Will. If you have questions, you can contact me. Yeah. So I think we did put our names in the beginning. Yeah.
There's also information on the website.
Right,
Yeah.
yes. Anything else? Yes.
In your experience, enriched fields have more opportunities for the people who don't have a driver's license?
Oh, that's a good question. So, yeah. So aged care, schools, some of the homelessness programs, many of the community development placements. So this is if you don't have a driver's license.
It also depends where you're living,
Yeah.
and what access you've got to public transport in that area.
Yeah. So don't worry, it's doable. Yeah. Any other questions? Are there any questions from our online participants? Okay. All right. Anything else that you want to add, Will or Kim?
No, I think that's covered everything. Thanks, Janine.
Thank you. So I reckon we'll wrap up there, but we really want to wish you the best with your studies. We hope to see you around the next couple of years. And I have to say, one of my favorite things to do is to go to graduation and see people walk past the stage to graduate. So I hope to see all of you in a couple of years time at graduation, and I hope you have an amazing experience studying social work with us at Flinders, and welcome again.
Where do these go?
Back here. Thank you. Do you get the That sounds like